This is Dr. Daniel Kurlinski bringing you an update about 3 months later since my presentation on post-COVID fatigue syndrome. We've actually had a lot of interesting developments. I presented some information about Dr. Perrin's idea of a lymphatic system that gets clogged up in chronic fatigue syndrome, and how what was found molecularly in the metabolomic studies from Stanford was that the brain stops producing sphingolipids, sphingomyelin, and phospholipids, which make up the neuronal cell membranes after the lymphatics are clogged. A signal goes and the brain stops making new neurons. So all of you out there that have had some difficulty communicating recently with people who haven't had a new neuron in a decade, their neurons are busy with what they already think. So there really isn't much room for anything new. So we looked into the research from Alzheimer's research teams and mice that have begun tracking what the lymphatics that drain the brain and skull actually look like. In addition to the loop going this way and this way, sagittal plane, coronal plane, there's also two lymphatics that come down diagonally forward from the sagittal lymphatic vessel. And it's in the groove of the middle meningeal artery. So if you just run your fingers along, you can find this little groove. And there'll be a lymphatic in there that's significantly helping drain the frontal lobes, of whatever, damaged material the brain needs to get rid of that it can't fully metabolize and digest, within the matrix of the brain itself. So what the researchers found was that there were 3 small loops of lymphatic vessels running in little concentric rings right at the base of the occiput. And that the lymphatics for the brain don't drain down the side of the neck to the thoracic duct. No, they come down the back of the neck and down the vertebral column. Right at the outer edge of the vertebral column, there's like 2 lymphatics that come down. And as we learn to massage these posterior lymphatics and get them mobilized, then it's like pulling the drain plug out of the back of the skull. Because what happens is the 3 rings at the back of the skull were found to be more porous. They were smaller than these big lymph vessels. They were narrower, but they were porous. And what that means is when the lymphatic system backs up because it's blocked, the lymph gooky, toxic, gunky material that the 100 enzymes are working on to try to break down and dissolve oozes out of these 3 little rings. And you get this gunky paste that turns into something rubbery, like a lymph node, and then it gradually takes the back of the skull and it squeezes it in and in and in, instead of having a nice round back of the skull that for people is at least as wide as the rest of the skull, and some people wider. It gets narrow, so narrow that I'm calling it a teacup occiput, a teacup occiput. So once we get the lymphatics moving, we actually can go in and work with the brain in the sort of myofascial technique I'm now calling the 2-hand combination lock. So you divide the back of the lip of the occiput in half, and you work on one side, and you determine which way will it move, up or down, medial or lateral, clockwise or counterclockwise. And you stack those 3 dimensions. Then you take your other hand, place it anywhere else on the head that you want, and check, will it go up or down? Which one goes easier? Down. Medial or lateral? Medial or lateral? Lateral. And then clockwise or counterclockwise? Clockwise. So I've stacked 1, 2, 3, 4. And as soon as that's in place, the magnetic field of the collagen sheets, which are considered piezoelectric material, it absorbs the pressure, converts it into a larger magnetic field, and then all of the collagen molecules, which are long, narrow spirals, begin to align themselves to be parallel in a magnetic field. So even the bone changes shape because inside each area of the bone there's a collagen fiber that the crystals form around. And even though the crystals are forming around it, that collagen fiber can rotate, and spin. And so the bone can change shape and widen, which is really what we need to get to the place where there's enough flushing of the lymphatics, there's enough space that the brain can listen to the message of the sphingolipid and start making some new neurons and go through the garden and take the weeds out, make sure everything's spaced evenly. So it's like an orchard where the trees are shaped. The neurons could be shaped like trees. They could be shaped like vines in a vineyard, where the branches are very carefully arranged at a spatial distance that up to now, till we studied 1 cubic millimeter of mouse brain and looked at every single neuron in there, we did not know how important the spacing was. So in chronic fatigue, your neurons could be falling into each other. In chronic fatigue, we know we're not making any new neurons. So instead of waiting for the brain to figure out how to get some sphingolipids to restart growing some brain, we looked online for sphingolipids, and the first thing I found was called sphingomyelin, and bought some bottles for $10, 250 milligram capsules, and you read the fine print, and what it really is called a glandular. It's an extract of bovine, which means cow brain. And I tried a few of those, and I started looking, wondering, where does this really come from? Could it come from a slaughterhouse anywhere, in the world? So I looked a little bit further, and I found a company in New Zealand called Grass-Fed that advertises that they have organic, no pesticide, no GMO, grass-fed cows that are very carefully treated, and after butchering, they very carefully freeze-dry brain tissue. And their formula contains 250 milligrams of this glandular sort of extract brain. It includes pituitary, pineal, nerve growth factors, and all the materials needed to build a neuron. All the raw materials come, so it's not just being stimulated by the sphingolipids, which help regulate stages of brain development. It's bringing a truckload of supplies, concrete, pipes, 2x4s, electrical conduit, everything you need to build the house of brain, comes with it. And it's like 30 cents a pill. And at least their website advertised that they're inspected, and so I have more confidence in knowing where the materials come from. Ancestral supplements say, in ancient times, all tribes knew, that the organs of a healthy animal killed can become a form of medicine for whichever organs we're having difficulty with. And as I began to consider that, I looked at sort of the limitations of my career as a psychopharmacologist, trying to match synapse levels and adjust them relative to each other. Synaptical neurotransmitter adjustment does not build new brain cells. Even when we found how to remyelinate the nerve fiber bundles, which makes up half of the brain, by transforming oligodendrocytes to be starting making and applying myelin, we weren't making new neurons. Even when we stopped inflammation in the brain and started getting rid of the built-up post-inflammatory junk in the brain with minocycline, we're building some new neurons because minocycline is actually a stem cell activator. And what's called a paracrine hormone, which means it helps activate genes in the cells that are located near each other. But this is sort of new. My parents are 93 and 94 years old, and I was looking, is there anything I could bring, that might help stabilize brain after stroke and after dementia? And, if you have some courage, take a look at brain-fed, grass-fed beef brain, on Amazon's the easiest place to find it. This is not a paid advertisement in any way. What I found was after the first capsule, within about 15 minutes, I could feel the part of my brain and head that's been a little bit swollen and stiff on the right side. Felt like somebody had come in and sponged it off, and then put on some ointments and sort of rubbed it in a little bit. There's a very distinct sensation in the exact place of my most recent injury, which was a vaccination mishap where I was injected a little bit high into a scar in my rotator cuff. It went into the bloodstream and went right to the brain, hit the surface of the right parietal lobe, penetrated into the lateral ventricles, swelled up the lining of the lateral, penetrated down into the third ventricle, swelled the lining of the third ventricle, and got down into the fourth ventricle. And that's about when I lost track of it. But I've had some brain swelling as a result of the vaccine, and this is the first thing that's really made a difference. I know there's lots of people that are going to have worse brain fog syndromes from COVID-19 infection, and the post-COVID syndrome includes brain fog. And what that really means is even when there's not viruses propagating in our body, the spike protein is the instrument of doing cell damage, fusing cells together, busting apart, the limitations that keep the nucleus in each cell, and then exploding, at least in the laboratory, in human cell culture, the spike protein merges with angiotensin. They've got this in wonderful color fluorescent dyed movies. And then it forms a different kind of polymer. It attracts 20 to 40 cells to it, human cells, and then they all start bubbling up and explode. So we know the spike protein has the potential to do a lot of damage. This is not meant as encouragement for anyone not to get vaccinated. We don't know exactly how many spike proteins the vaccines are creating. We started with 150 million was the Russian target, for their vaccines, using a different, bacteria to carry it. But, the messenger RNA lipid-coated nanoparticles go anywhere in the entire body. They don't stay in your arm or in the lymph nodes in the armpit. So my current estimate is that there's probably going to be billions of spike protein created in probably hundreds of millions, of cells in our body. And if they happen to be in the brain, it's been known for 20 years that spike protein, from other coronaviruses and other viruses, can dissolve in the myelin tubes, from the white matter in our brain. So when this, grass-fed, sphingolipid plus everything else in the glandular brain extract, came to this area and it warmed it up right away, I said, there's some intelligence in the molecules. They know what to look for in the brain because it went right to the area of injury. About 3 days later, I put my hands on my head. I examined heads all day long, and I've always had some flatness on the right side, of my skull. That's been my sort of dry area. And all of a sudden, it was round. I have, if you look at my eyes very carefully, my eyes are better aligned on the similar level than they were before. And birth accident, I think, was umbilical cord too tight around the back of my neck, which pinched off my right vertebral artery, so that it doesn't penetrate in through the foramen magnum into the skull and feed the back of the brain. So I'm living off sort of a half-brain approach to life. But last night, I noticed for the first time that the pulsation along my right vertebral artery was going up higher than I remembered. And I followed the pulsation of the right vertebral artery all the way up inside my skull. So the additional neurons, the additional brain growth that happened in the injured area called for more arteries. It called for more blood supply. And so in anastomosis, this right vertebral artery, which sort of went across to the left side and sort of died in the midline, is actually grown up into my brain. So I have sort of more blood supply, for the right side of my brain. We'll see if it improves my basketball shooting at all. But it let me know that the organ genesis that follows tissue, not just repair and healing, but tissue growth later in life, may bring, sort of like global climate change, a bunch of unexpected synergies along, which for us may help save us from the greatest, likelihood of extinction, the danger of global brain damage, which has really been a result mostly of toxic chemicals that we humans have produced, pesticides like chlorpyrifos that stop white matter growth and development, drugs like statins, which 50 million Americans are on, which makes them think very similar to the way the former president thinks and communicates, and even, our greatest scientists, who for almost 2 years have not realized that we don't need 72 spike proteins to be the key to open one door of one cell. 2 spike proteins, in case the first lock didn't work, 3, 4, but 72, no. How could it not be clear that spike protein was doing far more than merging with an angiotensin receptor so that the virus could get into the cell, So, like it or not, the spike protein, has shown itself to be far more effective than expected. They're saying if it meets 50% reduction in COVID cases, serious COVID cases, they would pass it and we're hitting like 90%. And that's because lipid-coated nanoparticles go right into the lymphatics, and that's where the immune system's sort of waiting for it. But, we pay a price for it. To everyone that's not sure about getting vaccinated, would you rather have 2 billion spike proteins in your body, or 200 billion spike proteins? Think about that. Make your decisions. And what I want to say is, don't be afraid. Grass-fed, beef brain and liver extract costs about 30 cents a pill. And if we can treat a vaccination side effect for 30 cents a day, or live it up, 60 cents, live it up, put a whole 90 cents into take 3 a day, and I can tell you, a few months from now, more of Americans might be able to communicate together in what we used to call citizen self-government, which right now, our brains don't allow us any meaningful communication. So, from New Mexico, the holiest day of the Jewish, year, Yom Kippur, the day of judgment, the day of atonement, the day of returning to the state of oneness. on all levels, with each other, with the Spirit, on the level where all life is one life, on the level where all light, all consciousness is one light, on the level where matter is also light. Let's join together a small prayer and say, thank you, great cow, great sacred animal of India. We need that offering. So what will we do in return? Offer some life, offer some nurturance, offer some sustenance, offer some protection to all the other 100 million species of life on Earth. We can get a great gift, but we have to return a gift to the Earth. And, my proposal is simple. It's called the Sabbath day. It's kind of not exactly a new idea. Somebody else had it before, passed it along. It means one day, just stay home or go someplace within walking or bicycle distance. Turn off all the electricity that you don't really need to use. In the Jewish tradition, you cook your meals the day before. Sometimes they'll use a little warmer to warm it up, but turn your factories off. Stop the buses, trains, jet planes for a day. And within a couple of months, we'll be able to measure how much improvement we can actually make in the atmosphere and global climate change dynamics. It's a simple remedy, a Sabbath day, a day of rest. It's a rest for the Earth, like the Jubilee year. Once every 49 years, we're supposed to take a year off. Let the Earth regenerate. And, if it turns out scientifically that one day is not enough, guess what? We could do 2 Sabbath days a week. Some people Saturday, some people Sunday, some people Friday, and then study that. And woe to be. What if we needed 3 rest days a week? For those of us who are working 7 days a week, 3 rest days a week is sounding pretty good. For those of you who are home, not quite sure you want to or can go back into a high-pressure workplace, think about, what if 4 days a week, was full-time work? What if we could scale back, our consumption, our production, our toxic pollution, even our reproductive rates, to be able to come into balance on this earth? If this makes no sense to you at all, or if you turn this off and you forget everything I said, but you agree with me while I'm saying it, remember, one thing may help your brain. New neurons, new brain cells, tidying up your neuronal architecture in 6 different layers of the cortex, getting some fresh white matter to get your internet speed up to place between your right ear and your left. Remember, hands-on healing is what we all need to survive. The spike protein disrupts our collagen communication. So collagen's got to be stiff enough to be stable, but it's got to be flexible enough to allow movement. And this spike protein and the spike angiotensin polymer messes up our collagens, so we're all stiff. Stiff in the lungs, stiff in the heart, stiff in the brain, and this new version, stiff in the liver. So remember, touch each other, hug each other, 2-handed combination lock, up, down, left, right, work like that. Find the easy way that the body likes to go. Make your 2 hands as powerful as a defibrillator. Charge! And God bless us all.